President Trump says his phone call with Vladimir Putin went very well. The two leaders spoke for 2 hours as talks to end the war in Ukraine have intensified over this past week. They started in Istanbul, where officials from Russia and Ukraine met for the first time since March 2022. So, what progress has been made, and where do peace negotiations go from here? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the US president says Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiating towards a ceasefire to end the war after speaking on the phone with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump says the two sides now need to speak directly, appearing to take a step back from mediating. Last week, a delegation from both sides met in Istanbul, but President Putin did not show up, despite suggesting the talks.
For the first time since March 2022, Russian and Ukrainian officials met face-to-face in Istanbul. Zelenskyy was ready to meet Putin, but the Russian leader sent only a junior team. Trump had originally intended to go.
Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together.
Behind me, the Bosphorus, a symbol of Turkey's historic role, bridging east and west. And now it has become a platform for diplomacy. Turkey brought Ukrainian and Russian delegates to the same table, something many didn't think was possible. But deep divisions remain, and for now, peace is still out of reach.
The short meeting brought little progress. Sources say Moscow demanded Kiev give up territories still under Ukrainian control. European leaders called the proposal unacceptable. But there was an area of agreement, a possible prisoner swap, 1,000 from each side. Shortly after these talks, Ukraine says Russia launched the biggest drone attack since the war began, with Russia also claiming attacks on its territory. A day later, Trump spoke with Putin on the phone.
We just spent 2.5 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and I think some progress has been made. It's a terrible situation going on over there. 5,000 young people every single week are being killed. So hopefully we did something. We also spoke to the heads of most of the European nations, and we're trying to get that whole thing wrapped up.
Putin said the talks were frank and substantive.
We've agreed with the US President that Russia will propose and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum on a possible future peace treaty, defining a number of positions such as the principles of settlement, the timing of a possible peace agreement, including a possible ceasefire for a certain time if certain agreements are reached.
But for now, the fighting continues. A war Trump said he would end in 24 hours is looking no closer to peace, with the US hinting it could step away from the negotiating table.
Well, let's meet our guests. I'm delighted to say here with me in the studio we have Marko Gasic. He is a political analyst with a focus on Eastern European geopolitics. Joining us from Kyiv, we have Olesia Horiainova. She is co-founder of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Centre. And from Geneva, Switzerland, we have Gunilla von Hall. She is a foreign affairs correspondent for the Swedish daily newspaper Svenska Dagbladet. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Gunilla, to you first. You've just come back from Russia, 3 weeks working assignment there. What's your view on where the peace talks are now? I mean, does Putin even want this peace?
Well, that's the question right now. It is, a lot of people are doubting. There were hopes. I was in Russia when Putin went out and announced there were going to be some kind of talks in Istanbul. And then people had a little bit of hope that it will end, because everyone you speak to is tired of the war and want it to end, even though people do not dare to speak about it openly, or about the special military operation, as it's called. But then I think people were also they were skeptical. And when they saw what happened in Istanbul, that Russia sent very low level delegations, almost an intimidation for Ukraine that sent high level delegations. And the only result, so to speak, was that there would be an exchange of prisoners with no timeline. And then you had the phone call between Trump and Putin, and that didn't lead to anything either that is a concrete result. It's from Trump's point of view, he said, now we're going to have a start of some kind of negotiations between the parties. But when you heard the other side, which was Russia and Putin, they were very, very vague. They talk about memorandum of a possible future peace agreement, and that doesn't sound very hopeful. So today, I would say a lot of Russians are skeptical, perhaps a bit disappointed, and almost a bit resigned.
Olesia, to you, how much frustration then is there in Ukraine, you know, constantly hearing that there might be peace talks, this might happen, and from what we're seeing on the outside, Vladimir Putin just keeps stringing people along?
Yes, this is actually a very uneasy question, because this is what we saw from 2014, because the war started then, and since 2014 till 2021, we've seen all kinds of peace talking from Russian side, which was actually just increasing their appetite for our territories and didn't bring anything with it. So those peace talks, so-called peace talks that we saw in Istanbul last week, was nothing else as a continuation of that path that Kremlin with Putin took back in 2014. So this is the only way we can go from this place to actual peace and to actual peace talking and ceasefire for at least 1 month is applying pressure, more and more pressure on Russia from not only European countries, but also from the United States.
Marko, to you, what's your reading of Putin's situation right now? Peace talks in Istanbul last week that he called for and then didn't turn up for. I mean, Zelensky's there. Why didn't he go?
The question is there anything substantive to discuss? I mean, the point is they haven't got any basic agreement on what the subject of discussion is. So what's the point of turning up there for a charade? The fact is, I mean, there were peace talks in Istanbul before. In 2022, we got to an agreement between both the sides, which would involve Putin, as we call it, withdrawing his forces from Ukrainian territory in return for the security, which was the basic, elementary and obvious demand that the Russians had against NATO encroachment. And that was unfortunately our man Boris went as the messenger for the global liberalist element that wanted that war and said, don't agree to that. We can get you a better deal, and then we've had the war ever since. So talking in Istanbul, what's he going to be talking about? I would also just correct the point made about the war starting in 2014. It started actually in 2013 when the democratically elected president of Ukraine was overthrown by a coup, and then 48 people were burnt alive in Odessa.
But then Russia went into Crimea,
and then the central government of Ukraine
illegally.
Sorry?
Russia then went into Crimea
but the point
illegally.
Is, this is the basic cause of the war. The entire eastern part of Ukraine were entirely alienated by this, and the central government then proceeded to threaten them and to start shelling them, and that's the beginning of the military side of this war.
But Marko, you can't blame Boris Johnson, as you said, for Putin not turning up last week in Istanbul.
I can blame Boris for a lot, but I wouldn't blame him for that. The point is there's nothing substantive to discuss until both sides understand that they both have to give something. The only way we can get through this and out of this is to save, I mean, for the Europeans, credibility is everything. For Trump, credibility is very important. For the Russians and the Ukrainians, it's an existential battle for survival, and for both of them, all the stakes are high. Those alienated warring sides need to be brought back to deal together. And I'll give Trump credit for actually wanting them to deal directly with each other, because that's the only way we will get peace.
Well, let's get the American perspective then. Let's bring in Steve Gill, who joins us from the United States, a former advisor to numerous American presidents, including President Bush and Clinton. Steve, to you, how close do you think President Trump is now to saying enough and just walking away?
I think he's pretty close. And I think, as was just pointed out, a big part of that is that Zelenskyy has no rational path to even have a negotiation as long as he's continuing to demand that the Russian-speaking, Russian-oriented territories of Crimea and the Donbass somehow get returned to Ukraine, as long as he continues to espouse that NATO is going to expand into Ukraine. There's nothing really to talk about, and I think President Trump is realizing that Zelenskyy is the barrier to peace. And as the Russians pointed out in the negotiations last week, sending the same high-level people that negotiated a deal in 2022 that got scuttled by Boris Johnson, those same people said, look, if you don't give up the 4 or 5 territories now, it will be 8 in a couple of months. And when you look at what's the reality of what's happening on the battlefield, Zelenskyy is fighting a losing battle and apparently willing to fight to the last Ukrainian as long as it doesn't include he or his close advisors and financial advocates.
But Steve, you can't blame Vladimir Zelenskyy for defending his territory, wanting to keep his country in one piece. If this was the United States and someone was occupying, say, 5 or 6 of your southern states, and that was the peace deal, that you would have to give up those states, no American would sign that in a million years.
We had that deal in about 1865 when we fought a civil war, and it was ended by the force of arms, not by the imposition of our constitutional rights that states could withdraw. We've heard a lot about self-determination around the world. Why should the votes of those in Crimea, in Luhansk, in Mariupol, in Donetsk, why should their self-determination be ignored? And let's just look at the reality. And how is Ukraine going to retake those territories? Are they going to send in French, British, German troops? Are they going to fight on the battlefield?
Olesia, I just want to bring you in at this point. How do you feel as a Ukrainian when you hear Steve saying that the biggest barrier to peace is Zelenskyy?
Oh, I felt like I've just heard a couple of minutes of well-prepared Russian propaganda, so sorry for saying that, but it is true about beginning of the war being in 2013 and about Zelenskyy staying in the way of peace. This has nothing to do with reality, because when this year peace talking, so-called peace talking from American side began, and we saw a change of rhetoric from American administration, all Ukrainians stand out for that, and we understood all Ukrainians, meaning Ukrainian president and Ukrainian government and Ukrainian citizens, all were and still are united in the desire of just peace, because many of our relatives, many of our friends, partners, children were killed, deported to Russia by Russian army, and other many just atrocities were made by Russian army on that regard. So I don't think that Zelenskyy is standing in the way of anything on that regard.
Thanks, Olesia. Gunilla, how much opportunity do you think there now is for European leaders to step in and be moderators, be negotiators, and bring these two warring sides to a table?
I think it's difficult, but I think Europe now realizes, as they've realized lately, that they have to now maybe be on their own. It seems like they have to be tough on Russia on their own. It seems like the United States doesn't want to support that, as we saw with the sanctions, the 17 sanctions package that was pushed through by the EU. And Europe is trying at least to unite and be tougher on Russia, while the United States seems to have a bit of a different strategy, more talking to Russia about making the sanctions be a bit lighter, do business deals and so forth, more of a carrot strategy, while Europe wants to have a stick strategy, be much tougher on Ukraine. Can they do it? Yes, but it's also, Europe is not completely united. We have to remember that. You have Slovakia, you have Hungary, you have Serbia. Slovakia and Serbia, they were also at the military parade in Moscow on the 9th of May. And there is a kind of split in Europe. It's not broken apart completely, but there are different views on how to handle Russia and what kind of attitude to have with the country. Another problem is that if the US, if Trump now turns away and there's no interest in supporting Ukraine financially, militarily, who is going to do it? It's Europe. And is the appetite there in all of Europe to pay money, troops, weapons, and so forth? Can Europe really do it? It looks quite shaky now. They want to be firm, but under the surface, maybe it's not so. There are different views on how one should handle Russia and how we should go forward. I want to just mention there, too, one thing about, for the moment, Putin is not giving there are no concessions. He's showing no willingness to give any concessions. And when I was in Russia now, I met many soldiers, and I see among quite a few of them, they say, no, we have to continue, we have to take more, go to Dnepr, go to Odessa, because it has to be worthwhile. We have to come back home with a bigger, what they see as a prize that's going to be worthwhile, all the dead and all the blood that has been created by this war. And this is quite troubling. It shouldn't be underestimated. There are people who really want in Russia to continue, take more of Ukraine.
Thanks, Gunilla. Thank you. Marko, one European leader who's not a politician, Pope Leo. The Vatican has dropped very heavy hints lately that it would be prepared to offer its services as a venue for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Do you think that might be a suitable kind of opportunity?
Everything's an opportunity if there's a basis for the opportunity. Now, whether it's in a lovely place like the Vatican or anywhere else, it won't matter at all if there's not a basic agreement about what to do next. And one of the things that should be done next, I think that, Steve's made some very good points, but I would say that the territory thing, there is one caveat. The Russians want security. They always have. Obviously, Ukraine wants security as well. The Russians have territory that the Ukrainians would like back. The Russians will want security that they'd like back. There's a point in these negotiations where we need to be saying some land for that security. Russians have to almost accept a kind of compromise for a final peace treaty as opposed to a meaningless ceasefire like they had agreed in Minsk where Merkel and Macron said we lied about that anyway, even though it went up to the Security Council. We don't want ceasefires like that. We want an end to the war. People talk about the need for a peace. Yes, but we're only going to get a peace if both sides get something very important to them.
Steve, to you, is the minerals deal what is going to keep Trump interested in peace in Ukraine then?
I think the minerals deal is actually a facade, even though there's been an approval by the parliament in Ukraine. There are still a lot of details that have not been resolved, and I think there's still some litigation that may come over that minerals deal of whether it's real or whether it's a facade. The other problem is that President Zelenskyy, because he's already imposed his own executive order forbidding him from negotiating with President Putin, he's got to get around that. And second, if there is any negotiation that gives up territory, under Ukrainian law, there has to be a referendum, and the people of Ukraine have to vote in giving that territory away or losing it. You can't have a referendum when you can't have an election thanks to Vladimir Zelenskyy. So I think there are some legal problems of reaching something. And I don't think the venue, whether it's the Vatican, whether it's Istanbul, is the issue. It's whether or not Vladimir Zelenskyy will realize reality that this war is lost. And he's negotiating from a position of the loser, not the winner. And yet he's making demands like he's won on the battlefield.
Agreed.
Well, Steve, nobody has elections during a war. Let's just make that point. Olesia, I can see you disagreeing with Steve again.
Yeah, big time, of course. This is another portion of Russian propaganda, so I'm of course disagreeing with that. Nobody is talking about giving, lawfully giving our territories to Russians, and nobody is talking about taking back what Russians took from our territories, meaning Donetsk and Luhansk, some parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and territory of Crimea back in 2014. This is not a negotiation point as of now. As of now, everybody was talking about like European leaders and US, new administration, together with Ukrainian government and Ukrainian president, was talking about a goodwill sign, which can put an end to this war, meaning a 30-day ceasefire. So nothing else was discussed, only threats and empty threats from the Russian side, which were posed on Ukrainian delegation back in Istanbul last week. And I should just remind all of us here that Russia, throughout the last 2 years of war, couldn't succeed in taking anything major on the front line, meaning Chasiv Yar, Donetsk region, Pokrovsk, Kupiansk and Kharkiv region, nothing. So I don't believe that we need to speak about who's being loser and who's not. And at that given moment we are in right now. And if we are talking about peacekeeping in Europe for decades ahead of us, I think that we should think about what we can do for Russia not to go and try to take another country's territory like Baltics or Poland.
Thanks, Olesia.
Gunilla, I have to quickly point out.
Okay, come back to you, Steve. Go on.
A 30-day ceasefire is not a ceasefire if Europe continues to put munitions and missiles. If they rearm, that's not really a ceasefire.
Correct. But Steve, that's what Russia's going to do. That's exactly what the Russians are going to do.
For sure, they will.
Right. So a ceasefire is irrelevant. And I think she needs to look at what's happening on the battlefield. It is ridiculous that we keep hearing that Russia is going to take Europe, and on the other hand, that they haven't taken enough of Ukraine. Which is it? Are they powerful enough to take the Baltics, or are they weak and can't even take these areas that she just named off? And I think she needs to check the battlefield because most of those areas are falling by the hour.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Olesia. I want to bring Gunilla back in. Gunilla, there was one piece of conversation last week in Istanbul I thought was interesting. Now, viewers might know you are originally from Sweden. You write for the #1 Swedish newspaper, Svenska Dagbladet. There was a comment dropped by one of the Russian delegation at the table last week. You're nodding in agreement, where he said, "We fought Sweden for 21 years." Is this a little bit of an outline into an insight into the Russian mindset here?
I think it's a way of course, that was very much noticed in Sweden, because, yes, it was 21 years of war that Sweden lost. And it was a bit of for the Russians to draw this kind of historic parallel. And that's a way also motivating perhaps people and see that we are strong and we can stick to this war as long as we have. Like Putin was saying also when the talks in Istanbul started, he was saying we have 100,000 more soldiers we can bring in. I mean, it's a huge country. They have people, they pay well, they get people to fight. That is true. They have problems in the army too, but they have people. And I think that was the message they wanted to send, that we are willing to go continue as long as it's needed. I think that's even what he said. And also we have to remember in that perspective that, yes, EU, Europe, the US is not very fond of Russia and Putin, but Putin also, and this is something he showed at the military parade in Moscow, has a lot of new friends that he wants to show off. Xi Jinping was sitting very close to Putin during the parade. You had Lula from Brazil, you had Venezuela, you have Cuba, you have, a lot of states that he now wants to surround him with to show that, look, it's a new global, new world order, and I have other friends I can turn to and do business with.
Thanks, Gunilla. Marko, just as we draw an end to the conversation, what do you think needs to happen for an immediate 30-day ceasefire? Cards on the table, how likely is it?
Well, I think, as has been said already, with neither side intending to not arm in the pause, it's not a ceasefire. It's simply a kind of a rearmament, a break, which is going to make the war stronger afterwards. We need to understand that both sides, really, the problem is the Europeans are motivating Zelensky to really play hardball. If the Europeans tell him, you have to deal, he will deal. But the Europeans are afraid of egg on their face, and that's the problem. European credibility is now the heart of the problem. Zelensky will do what the big powers tell him, but if the big powers are divided between Trump and the Europeans, then he can play either way, rather as they did in Bosnia in the 1990s. So I would say the Europeans have to get on board with the Trump project, say to Zelensky, deal for territory, deal and be ready to give some security. Don't think you're going to get security and the Russians aren't. As Steve has said, you've lost this war in effect now by the time we rearm.
They haven't lost the war.
But by the time
they're still fighting on.
I know, but it's now a dead man walking. The desertions in the Ukrainian ranks, the 47th Brigade,
well, hang
the 59th
on. Russians
Brigade,
have to bring in troops from North Korea, support from China. You know,
but
there's lots going on here.
I understand. But the direction of travel is westwards.
Steve, final point to you. How close is President Trump then from just walking off?
I think it depends on what happens the next couple of weeks. And I would point out that continued negotiations, continued talking doesn't guarantee peace. But if you're not talking, you're not making progress. So at least there are conversations at the highest level. Trump talked to Putin for 2 hours, and that's a step in the right direction. Now we need to get progress not only on the battlefield, but in the diplomatic rooms.
Thanks, Steve. Olesia, Gunilla in Switzerland, and Marko Gasic here in the studio with me. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.